Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for recognizing me, and I do have a few questions and concerns to the proponent of the bill through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter, will you prepare yourself, Madam? Representative Sredzinski, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The question has been asked and answered, and a lot of my questions have already been addressed, and I plan on not asking any repeat questions. I hope that makes the chairwoman a little bit happy about that. One of the questions that was asked and answered had to do with the exceptions and who are we exempting from the bill. I understand the restaurant workers and the bartenders. There was some language in the bill about hotel employees. My concern is about some of the nonprofit employees. And I know we had an amendment that would have excluded nonprofit employers from this bill. So just for clarification, are nonprofit employees still included in the underlying bill as we're voting on this morning? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the answer. In line 51 and 52, it talks about the training rate, we'll call it, for persons under the age of 18. One of the questions that I've had during the debate was that I assume that for 16 and 17-year-olds in high school, they're obviously getting their first job. Maybe it's a seasonal job, maybe it's a second job, but they're still very young and learning skills, and they have not yet even graduated high school. So those what would be considered a low-skill employee, an entry-level employee, and as a result of not having much experience, not having much education, those employees, if they have jobs, would be considered sub-minimum wage or training wage jobs. However, if any of those students were to turn 18, automatically, according to the bill, they would be automatically granted the minimum wage. So, question to the proponent of the bill is, was there any consideration to amending it or including language that included information about graduating high school as a trigger to receive the minimum wage? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I can't remember off the top of my head. It may have been, but I can't say absolutely. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the good chairwoman for her answers. She'll probably be happy to know that I'm not planning on introducing an amendment doing that right now, just for discussion purposes and for legislative intent only. Moving on to line 53 and 54, the question about the hours versus days was already asked by the representative from the 113th District. However, and I appreciated the answer about it's easier to calculate days versus hours. However, further clarification I was seeking is that there are plenty of jobs out there that have, atypical hours. It could be a 4-hour shift, it could be a 2-hour shift, it could be a 12-hour shift. The 90 days that's included in this language is obviously new to this section of the statutes. For the good chairwoman, what does that 90 days represent? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Through you, Madam Speaker, the 90 days represents a training wage. Through you.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll try to be a little bit more clear in my question. So does the 90 days, is that a 90 days from the date of hire? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And for clarification on that, if someone were to be hired and work 12 hours a week, 12 hours a day, not to get to the overtime level of 40 hours per week, but if they were to work those many hours, the 90 days would still apply according to the statute. Is that correct? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that is correct.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you for the clarification. And would this also apply to part-timers or per diem staff in the same way? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And for the purposes of negotiation with the governor's office, as I understand, that's why we're at the 90-day language, as opposed to if you were to do simple math and say 90 days times a typical 8-hour day is 720 hours. So the 720 hours wasn't included in the bill. The thought was the 90 days would be a compromise that would be greater to achieve the end result of the bill, which is passage. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Yes, Madam Speaker, it was considered to be an easier calculation in helping to administer this language. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the chairwoman for her answers. And for just one more part of clarification on that one section about the 90 days, is there anything that would prevent, let's say, a seasonal worker? I know that the discussion was had earlier that 90 days was chosen by the governor's office or by the proponents and negotiators of this bill because 90 days is typical summer, so 3 months. That 3-month period. Let's say, for example, there was someone who worked seasonally, including the summer, but also outside of the summer months in maybe the fall or the winter. Maybe it's a agricultural operation, maybe it's a tree farm, a pumpkin farm. So if that 90 days were to happen in the summer, would there be any consideration to stopping employment and restarting? And if that were to be the case, let me rephrase that just to make sure I'm clear. So I want to make sure I'm clear. It's 4:30? It's early in the morning, and I want to make sure that I'm clear in my questions. The 90 days of someone who is employed under the training wage, is there anything to prevent an employer from hiring someone for a period seasonally, terminating and hiring them back to prevent having to pay the full minimum wage per this statute? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe, and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna give it back to you just to make sure that I'm clear on what you're asking. You wanna know if the employer, if I'm working for someone, before the 90-day period is up, they let me go, and then they hire me back or they hire another employee? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, and I appreciate the clarifying question. So I love, when I talk about legislation, I always use hypotheticals because I find it to be the easiest way to explain intent of the law. So in this case, let's say I'm a seasonal employee and I'm working at a Christmas tree farm, and for the Christmas season, I am working for 80 days just because that's the length of the season. And then the Christmas tree farm no longer has any business for me, no hours. And so I, in effect, terminate my employment. I either resign or I am let go, laid off. And then summertime comes along and it's strawberry season or blueberry season or whatever the case may be, and they want to hire me back. It's not an intentional termination or letting go just so they don't have to pay that wage, but could it be something that businesses could get caught into? So it wouldn't be intentional, it wouldn't be malicious, but it would be one of those unintended consequences that was mentioned earlier by the representative from the 76th District. So would that example qualify in this bill, Madam Speaker?
Representative Porter.
Through you, Madam Speaker. That is not addressed in the bill. Through you.
Representative Sredzinski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In some of my discussions with nonprofits, especially nonprofits surrounding day camps, vacation camps, they often pay or compensate some of their workers through stipends, which works out better for both the employee and the employer, because paying an hourly rate for someone who's doing, let's say, a weekend trip makes less sense because, yes, while they're technically on the clock, they would be getting paid for resting, for sleeping, for recreation time. So stipends are often paid. Is there anything in this bill that would address someone being paid by stipend versus just the hourly rate, which we see in this bill? Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Porter,
Through you, Madam Speaker, no.
Representative Sredzinski,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The reason I ask some of these questions is that specifically in my district, and for the good chairwoman, if she would care to have a seat and relax, I'm just going to kind of make some comments. So I know it's been a long, arduous evening into morning. The reason I bring up these points and ask these questions for clarification is that in my district, the 112th district in Monroe Newtown, we have a YMCA, the Lakewood Trumbull YMCA, that is located on the Trumbull-Monroe line, and also has a camp facility on State Route 59. And this particular bill is going to impact that YMCA, and to be honest, it's going to impact all of the statewide YMCAs in the entire state of Connecticut in potentially a very negative way. I know that there have been measures to address some of the concerns, especially concerning the minimum wage workers that are under the age of 18 with the training wage, and I do appreciate that. I'm glad to see that in the bill. However, the YMCA in my district still has significant concerns about the overall cost of doing business. And I think that that's something we've heard not only over and over again this morning and this past session, but through the last 5 years that I've been in the chamber, we've heard a lot about the cost of doing business in the state of Connecticut. And I think it's important to realize that even though some of the intentions behind this minimum wage increase is to address for-profit major corporations, where we see or we hear that people say that these large corporations are making billions in profits and their workers are not being compensated fairly. While I understand that argument, when we apply this minimum wage increase across the state of Connecticut, we're also targeting programs such as the Lakewood Trumbull YMCA, which offers things like fitness classes, sports, childcare services, and summer camp. The YMCA in Monroe is open 7 days a week. It's open for 16 hours during the weekdays. It's open on Saturdays and Sundays, and includes programs for not only children, but adults as well. And I have specific numbers that indicate that over 700 youth in not only Monroe, but the region, including Bridgeport, Trumbull, Shelton, Easton, Fairfield, also attend some of the YMCA classes. And the underlying reason that they exist and the function they perform is to really foster childhood development and provide a service for parents that are working either regular jobs or working multiple jobs, or serving for before or after school services. Some of the services they provide for schools, after school, before school, there's over 130 children in my community that attend one of the two elementary schools for their before or after school programs. That's 130 children with parents who either need assistance before school or after school to make their ends meet, so they can pay their bills, so that they can go run their businesses, perhaps provide employment to others throughout the state of Connecticut. And the school care programs offer multiple different kinds of services, everything from homework help to arts and crafts to physical fitness to healthy eating habits. And the YMCAs employ approximately 20 part-time staff members that help to care for these children before and after school. Not all of them are minimum wage, but a significant number of them are minimum wage. And we hear about what the minimum wage could do to help some of the folks in our communities that are rely on that minimum wage, and certainly an increase in the minimum wage would provide more money in the pocket of those who do receive the minimum wage. But there's also another side of it. With the increase in minimum wage could result in, just to the Trumbull YMCA, is a decrease in before or after school services, a loss in jobs due to the employee costs of the organization. And if the YMCA doesn't cut hours, then they have to increase the prices they charge the parents who are dropping off their kids, which would lead, unfortunately, to parents not being able to afford dropping their kids off or leaving them at school to be cared for by the YMCA programs. And this is a service, again, that provides this care where parents then can go to work. They can be at work early, they can be at work late, to provide for jobs elsewhere in the state of Connecticut, to provide for a boost in the economy. Further, if a drop in staffing happens, that means less quality attention. And we all know the results of what happens when class sizes increase or when nursing home staff is cut. It means that there's more students, more children, more patients to the amount of staff, and that simply becomes a drop in the quality. And while I appreciate the proponents' intention of the bill, I certainly don't believe that the intention behind this bill before us this morning is to try to reduce services or try to limit the amount of time that counselors can spend with kids, or to prevent parents from being able to afford daycare, after school services, summer vacation camp. There's nothing in this bill that would indicate that that is the intention of the bill. Therefore, I think it's important to point out some of these unintended consequences that undoubtedly will result in some of these issues. One of the other services that the YMCA provides is the day camp service. This is something that I've visited on multiple occasions, normally in the summertime. And the one thing that I notice is all of the high school age children, whether they're 16, 17, or 18, and they are employed happily by the organization to provide care, to provide instruction. There's a ropes course, there is a pond, there is a pool, there is a bike tour. There's plenty of things for the children to do on a day-to-day basis when most parents in my community are at work, whether they're running their own business or working for another employer. And this gives them the freedom, and more importantly than the freedom, but the comfort to know that they're able to drop their child off somewhere where they're not only receiving instructional care, but they're also receiving physical activity. They're doing things that are testing their minds, their bodies, and having that be jeopardized in any way is a concern for me and a concern for my entire community. Again, many of these counselors, this is their first job ever. And they enjoy the fact that they're out there with younger kids, that they're out there in the pond with a boat, teaching them how to fish, or walking the trails on the camp to show them stuff about the trees and the ferns and the hedges and all of the stuff that they do on their nature walks. It's a benefit that the community truly enjoys and provides such a critical service. This bill, with that increase in the minimum wage, again, could result in a loss of some of those jobs. The representative from Shelton, from the 113th District, talked about that $100. Well, that $100 doesn't change based on the rate that you pay. The only way that rate changes, that $100 changes in order to pay your employees more, is to increase the amount of revenue. And in this case, that would mean an increase in revenue of the parents that are spending the money to have their kids taken care of. And I think it's important. I focused a lot on the Trumbull YMCA and the services they provide, but it's not just my YMCA and my local communities. It's statewide. And statewide, the YMCAs are dedicated to youth development, healthy living, including physical activity, nutritional eating, core values, which are very important to the organization, of caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility. Now, who in this building can't support the idea of kids getting exposed to caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility. I think all of us know the value of those values on a day-to-day basis. And I know that I instill in the people I meet and my son these values that are so important to not just learning on a day-to-day basis, but living and being a good member of our society. Also, I think it's important to note that the YMCAs have a very strong social responsibility policy. They do take private donations. Anyone in this chamber, anyone in the state of Connecticut, anyone in the world can sponsor kids to go to day camp, can sponsor kids to go to these programs. They offer financial assistance. That's the type of program, that financial assistance, that's the type of thing that gets cut when expenses need to be adjusted, when they need to look at revenues versus expenses and what's this going to do. And I would hate to see any child prevented from going to one of these services because of an increase in minimum wage that we do here tonight. And again, I firmly believe that the proponent of this bill does not intend to have these consequences exist. That is not the intention. However, we know all too well that legislation has a widespread impact and that our decisions can have a ripple effect across the state of Connecticut. As I talked about the fees that the YMCAs charge, I found them to be extremely reasonable. As we all know, the cost of childcare can be extraordinary, depending on what type of childcare you seek and the hours that you need. What I really found remarkable, and I learned about this in my research for this, is that from a low fee of $200 for a Y member, 3 days a week, it allows you to drop your child off early or keep them late at school. Now, if you need more coverage, they provide that. You can go up to 5 days a week, before and after school. So 5 days a week, before and after school, less than $500 a month. Now, these figures, in my opinion, knowing how much daycare costs, these figures are extremely reasonable. And they're able to do this because of support from the community, because of support from their members. These fees will undoubtedly be forced to rise. And when these fees rise, that pushes the cost of their services up, which I hope will not exclude anyone from the market of being able to afford these services. But unfortunately, I find that that might be one of the unintended consequences of this bill. And as I was doing my research on not only my local YMCA, I came across some numbers that really demonstrated how widespread and how far-reaching YMCAs provide for services in our state of Connecticut. Over 128,000 youth experience the value-based program each year. Over 128,000. Sharing those values that I talked about earlier: respect, responsibility, caring. What's even more remarkable? Over 156,000 adults are in these programs. There's more adults that are receiving programs from the YMCA than there are children. Now, you wouldn't know that by going to my local YMCA, where by far the children outnumber the adults. But to know that there statewide are that many adults taking part in these programs was simply remarkable. The after-school programs, and in my case at the Trumbull Monroe YMCA, the before-school programs, almost 15,000 students a year. 15,000 students a year are enrolled in these programs. Again, this is the critical service that gets provided before or after school that helps parents take care of their kids, and not only give them instruction, homework help, arts and crafts, physical activity, it also provides a confidence in the parents. When they drop their child off, they know that they're dropping off their child with a certified, trained, background-checked employee that's going to care for their child. Almost 5,000 children enrolled in preschool enrichment programs. Now, why is this important? As we all know, preschool is a very important part of a childhood's development. Before kindergarten, many parents struggle to figure out what to do with their children in childcare, and again, it can get very expensive. Another number that really struck me was the number of staff that YMCAs have statewide. Almost 8,000 employees statewide. 8,000 employees, full-time, part-time, providing services for children, providing services for adults. It's something that, taken piecemeal, might not be a huge impact. So if I just think about my local YMCA, I'll think about the programs in the summertime. I'll think about the day school, the day camp, the before and after school programs. But when you look at the numbers statewide, there are YMCAs all over the state of Connecticut, from Chester to Stamford to Westport to Mystic to Torrington, Winstead, New Britain, Naugatuck, and the list goes on and on and on. And I know that each one of us in this room, whether they are freshman legislators or are seasoned legislators, I know they've heard from their YMCAs. And I know that this concern has been brought to them. And I think it's important that we think about that and that we consider that as we develop our budget, as we consider taking a vote on this bill. The reason I spent so much time talking about not only my local YMCA, but the statewide YMCA, is because this will undoubtedly, this bill, if passed, will undoubtedly be an enormous fiscal impact on Connecticut's YMCAs. The financial impact to a $15 per hour minimum wage could be up to $4 million. Now, that is assuming that the training wage would not apply. So based on the training wage information that we got with our new version of the LCO, I'm confident that that number would be decreased. However, we're still talking about millions of dollars statewide to YMCAs that simply are providing a service to our youth. And I forgot to mention earlier, but Care for Kids is a big part of that. And I know that's a program that's near and dear to a lot of the people in this room. I think most of us, if not all of us, would agree that child care is unaffordable in many ways. Increasing the minimum wage will make child care at this level even less affordable, more expensive. And unfortunately, the YMCAs will have little choice but to increase their fees, reduce their staffing, provide for less services than they do now. And I know I spent a good amount of time talking about those services because I think it's important to know exactly what these organizations are doing, what the agencies are responsible for, the fact that they have hundreds of thousands of lives in their hands every single day. And that's something that we need to consider to make sure that they're not left out when this bill passes and they are left standing saying, you didn't think about us. Well, we can't say that. We've thought about you. We're listening. And I hope that my fellow colleagues will understand that this impact is going to be significant. This proposal will be detrimental on several levels to the YMCAs across our state of Connecticut. I hope that my colleagues think long and hard about casting their vote in favor of this bill in light of the fact that they would be hurting not only the nonprofits like the YMCAs, but all nonprofits in the state of Connecticut. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the time. I want to thank the good chairwoman for the answers to my questions. I urge my colleagues to reject this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.